This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Jessica Marie. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited.
Well, it's great to have new people on the podcast all the time. And this episode will be 953 of the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. We're tracking that on Apple Podcasts. So we've been on the air since 2016. So we're on our way to our episode 1000. And for those of you who are just listening on audio, we have your website as jessicamariestep.com up, and that will be fully clickable for those of you who see the published version on multiple platforms. You can click through on that and you can go to that website. So if somebody goes to your website, what would they find?
They'll find all of my coaching options and what I do. And then they'll also find some really awesome podcasts as myself and the next retreats that I'm hosting.
Well, that's cool. So again, that's fully clickable when we're published later on. But you can always type that in manually and go there right now. So thank you again for being on the podcast. And one of the things where we're going to talk about is the topic of this episode is finding purpose-based fulfillment. And however you
Mm.
want to approach that, maybe you want to talk about it from um, what you do as a life coach and spiritual guide in that perspective, and maybe just take the floor.
Yeah. Thank you so much. One of my favorite topics to discuss. So in my work with life coaching and spiritual guidance, I primarily work with women, and I really help them unleash their full potential through just letting go of these social norms and these internal programs that just keep us confined. And so I have found on my own journey in entrepreneurship, which is started in 2019 for me. I originally started in health and fitness coaching. So I left my corporate job. And when I started health and fitness coaching, I realized that I wanted to help people just be their best versions. And at that moment, that was in the gym and also eating better for their bodies. And so when I started to realize that there were more things underneath the hood, if you will, that were kind of keeping me stuck, that were keeping me feeling, I guess, uncomfortable in my mind, because a lot of society has this like what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And so for me, when I started to kind of do that work to unlearn those programs that were kind of set for me, set for a lot of us, especially the ones that are coming from corporate to entrepreneurship, there's so many of those restrictions that we find ourselves in, and then we have to like destigmatize and all of that. And so purpose-based fulfillment really for me means that I am allowing myself to find more purpose through the work that I'm doing and fulfilling ourselves. And so the way that I got to becoming a life coach was going through my fitness journey and finding more personal development through there. And again, unlearning these really deeply ingrained programs and behaviors and belief systems that were kind of, again, holding me back from the things that I felt true for me. And I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs can really empathize with that, because again, society kind of keeps us like, this is right, this is wrong. But then we're like, well, wait, but we're like wanting to move in different directions. So purpose-based fulfillment is really finding more of what lights your soul on fire and allowing yourself to use your gifts. And I really feel like everyone has this ability to awaken their intuition, to find more what passion and purpose means to them, and again to help raise the vibration of the collective consciousness and just really help make an impact in the world. So that is my definition of purpose-based fulfillment.
I think as a creative person, I'm a music producer, I'm a podcaster, and then my day job, I'm a software designer. And so I try to thread a needle between a left and right brain.
Yeah.
And you see behind me in my bedroom studio are all my synthesizers. And so I'm
Mm.
a bedroom producer, and for real, because they're right there. And so I just found a way to do both. And when I was like 17, I'm 55. there were a lot of kids
Mm,
I was playing music with, and if they didn't kind of make it get picked up by a record label, they just stopped. But to me, music was something that was just it's it's part of my therapy. It's part of how
mm,
I actually process things that happen to me. I just continue to do it, and I just felt like it's a passion from like my inner child, and I didn't give it up. And I
mm.
find that like if you still can keep that, because I was into it when I was like 14, and I'm still doing it. And some people
Yeah.
let that go because they let the world tell them, "Oh, that's silly.
Yes.
You're never going to make it. You know, if you're not going to sell a million copies, don't do it." And it's like you do it because you love it. You
Yeah.
you know, you're an artist because you love it, and if it happens to sell, it's fine. And I think a lot of people kind of do it by measurement. Like unless I
Mm,
break through, unless I get the label, unless I'm on tour, that I can't do it. And I think a lot of people, what I find is like they start to find later in life, like, oh, yeah, maybe I should pick up the guitar. Maybe I should go play the saxophone. Maybe I should pick up the brush. Whether you're going to make money isn't the only thing that you should measure with.
yeah. Yeah. I resonate so much. And I think like when I was leaving my corporate steady job, and wanting to become an entrepreneur, it's like the first thing is like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this for like actual monetary exchange, you know? And so, when I was wanting to start my online business, especially in the fitness industry, I was worried. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? But then I was like feeling like this really deep pull that like there's no other path but this one, you know? And so I definitely resonate a lot with like just you have to, it's just a deep inner calling. And I think everyone has purpose and everyone has potential. It's just up to you to awaken it and to really tap into it. And for those of us that have taken the risk,
Mhm.
and as you know, as an
Yeah,
entrepreneur,
something.
it's literally like this roller coaster, you know, but you wouldn't change it.
Yeah. Well, you find different things. It's like how I came in, like, why am I a podcaster when I'm a musician? Well, somebody came to me one day and said, "Hey, back in 2016, I hear all these songs on SoundCloud. Who are you? Who is this fan, Electric Ghost?"
Mm,
So the guy had a podcast on an app called Fairman. His name was Rock Tunes, and he had a podcast. So he said, "Let's do an interview." We liked each other so much on that interview. We had a show together for 6 months. We didn't plan
wow.
that. I mean, he planned to talk to me, but we didn't plan on doing a podcast. And then I opened myself up to, well, what is this podcast thing? And I kind of fell into it, and I wasn't trying to make any money, but now I'm monetized, and it wasn't a plan. It just kind of like I was having fun, and then it
Hmm.
became an opportunity, and I do it because I like it. I don't do it because of the money, but it's like if you do something you're passionate about, sometimes things just happen. And you can try to
Yeah.
direct it, but sometimes it's like I think it's authentic when you feel like you're good at it and you're passionate, then things start to, it's like the law of attraction. Things start coming to you because you feel good about what you're doing.
Yes, yes, I totally agree, and I think sometimes it's actually funny because I remember the day where I came home from work and I was living in Los Angeles at the time. And so I was at that corporate job. And I remember telling my roommate, like, oh, I'm just not happy. And I'm just sitting there like pouting. And I was really on my own fitness journey at the time. And I didn't put the pieces together yet. And she's like, well, Jess, you love to talk about fitness. You love to talk about nutrition. Have you ever thought about working in that? And I was like, personal trainers don't make money. And she's like, you're in Los Angeles. Like, yes, they do, And so it kind of sparked something for me where I was like, wow, like, how
Is
did I
it?
not like put that together? Right. And so then that's like for me, and I'm sure for you too, like the law of attraction, when I put that out there again, I didn't even know about that at the time in 2017, 2018. And so when I put that out there, I started to get resources. I started to get like social media influencers that were doing the thing that I wanted to do, which was become an online fitness coach. So I totally resonate. I think that sometimes things just, I don't think that they fall into our lap. I think that God, source, universe, like give us opportunities for us to like really find our calling in those different ways. And we finally just listen to it that one time.
Yeah, I think what happens is that you don't you don't listen to that like grandparent or parent voice saying, "Oh, that's silly. You shouldn't do that." Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You're open to it. Like I was open to podcasting. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that you could make money. It just seemed fun. It seemed like, it's like, well, let's try that. And, I just got really passionate about it, and what I found is it created, like, leads. By doing this,
Mm,
I've interviewed over, like, 4 or 500 people. And sometimes I get opportunities to do like commission work. Like somebody wants me to write music for their show, or somebody wants me
mm,
to write music for their therapy session, or they want me to write music for their video game or whatever. And it just comes because I get this big Rolodex of people I've talked to. And then they go,
yeah,
"Oh, you're a musician. What could you do? Oh, maybe you can help me with this." And it wasn't like I'm trying to pitch. The pitches just came,
yeah,
and it's like
yeah,
it's like and that feels good to me because I don't wanna be the salesperson. I'm, like, not really into sales,
yeah, yeah,
even
yeah,
though I
yeah.
know it's important, but I'd rather just kinda put it out there and show up
Be
and then
organic with
have it
it.
naturally happen. It just feels better for me. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I definitely resonate. I felt like for me too, it was pretty crazy how everything kind of just some of the things just fell into place. And so what was happening with me and like the big pivot I made from fitness to life coaching was really when I started to get women that I was working with the fitness coaching ask me more about mindset stuff. Like how do you stay motivated? How do you eat healthy? How do you like feel confident in your skin, right? And those are the things the gym doesn't do for you, right? The gym will make you strong, but you have to have the mindset, the
Mhm.
resilience to continue going in there. And so that kind of sparked some stuff within me that where I was like, wow, yeah, like this makes a lot of sense because it really isn't about the aesthetics, it's about how you feel on the inside of yourself. And so I started actually attracting a lot more women that were going through a lot of more um emotional things in their fitness. So they would come to me saying, I want to lose 10 pounds. And then we would like go deeper on the call and it'd be like, actually, I want to just feel attractive to my partner again. It's like, whoa, that's not what training is all about, right? And it's about the inside. And so that kind of gave me a wake up call within my own
Mm.
self because I feel everything is a reflection and a mirror for me to look within my own self when I'm seeing problems or seeing situations come to me in different people in certain in circumstances. And so that's when I started to do that work on myself to get to that place where I felt more confident to help these women into their mindset. And then that completely started to awaken me and then pivot my business. So yeah, it's crazy how things just kind of start to line up when you're living more of your purpose authentically and being open to it, right? You said that as well, being open to seeing where things go.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kinda like this idea is like this triangle kind of thing is like, holistic. Like is your mind, heart, body. You could open up and even be more like spirit, soul. And,
Yep.
being a producer, when I deal with musicians, like a lot of times when they come to me, sometimes they want to just clone something popular because they show me they can do it. And I'm like,
Mm,
no, I want you to show me the song you're afraid to show me. Right.
mm,
Show me what you're most afraid to show me that you don't, the song that you never show anybody. Not the song that shows that you can play, like do something like Taylor Swift or Beyonce or something that's in the top 20. I wanna hear you, because my whole point is I like to make somebody sound better, their authentic self, and just make them sound better, not try to turn them
hmm.
into somebody else, not try to turn them into
Yeah.
me or anybody else. I wanna make them who they are, and I think that's what a lot of times, like, when you're a coach or a mentor, it's the same idea. You're trying to get past the masks, past all the kind of things that people put out and trying to get to the heart of that authentic self or that inner child that's not getting what they want, that
Yes.
isn't where they wouldn't want to be. And why? Because they put a ceiling on themselves. Somebody
Mm,
told them something that they think is the truth, right? And it's just a belief. They say their father said, "You're never going to amount to anything with that music or that art, so you should give it up." And then you're
mhm.
like, okay, you're 7 years old, you hear that, and then you kinda put that ceiling, and then
Yep.
later you
Yeah.
find out, "Well, it's something I really wanna do, but, like, I don't feel I'm good enough, it's imposter syndrome or something." Like, you have to kinda get like, one leg of it isn't gonna do it. So, like, you're talking
Mm,
about the gym, well, if there's something in the head or the heart or the mind or the soul, you gotta fix that, or the all the work in the gym's not gonna really do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's such a valid point is that you're helping people become their most authentic self, and you know, in the beginning of my career, I thought I needed to be everybody else. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of people that start their own businesses, they're like, okay, who can I mirror right now, right? And I think that um, there's a positive standpoint to like get to know you by looking at other people, but you also have to find your voice. And I think as being a coach, being a mentor, really being of service to somebody else, right? You're helping them live out what their best intention is. And I think going into that route, it's really important to discern where you are sometimes interfering with that, interfering with what you want versus what the client actually wants and needs. You know what I mean? And I think the discernment there is important. And you know what you're
Hmm.
sharing with music, same concept. It's like, yeah, well, I want to make something that's going to be trendy, but at the same time, you're going to potentially lose your own authenticity. So, what's important to you? Right. And you want to be the person that's like going to stand up for them
Yeah,
and tell them the truth and recognize that part of them too. Like, help bring that authenticity out of them. Yeah.
it's really critical, I think, because we live in an age where people can just sample, where they can cut and paste, and
Yep.
they can go and be their heroes by cloning their heroes, using
Yep.
AI to clone their heroes and doing, and my whole issue with that is like, well, there's already this person. So what are you gonna do something that's better than what they already do, right? So it's
Yeah.
just do you and then I as a musician, one of the things we talk about is like I'm influenced by everything I ever heard. And so if I
Mm.
go and I just play live, I might unconsciously, subconsciously pull something from Coltrane or Davis or Sun Ra or John Lennon or whatever. But it's kind of unintentional because it's like in your subconscious as a musician.
Right.
Everything you've ever played or listened to is like there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
how you weave it together is your unique vision. And some people want to do it note for note. Other people kind of let go and let it be kind of this muse inspired universal thing, and then it becomes their own. And so sometimes it's
Mm.
like trying too hard to make it perfect actually wrecks it. You're like trying to just like feel it. And what we call like, be in the flow state. I
Yeah.
think that's and I think it applies to a lot of things. There's a lot of people don't know how to be in that flow state.
Right. I agree. I totally agree with you. I think that um there's it's just it's a challenge, you know, and I think that it's like I can even attest to that too. Again, like when I first started my business and when I was like, okay, like when I just was going into fitness and then even also more so with life coaching, I started to see actually a lot of my friends who were coaches shifting their businesses from fitness to life coaching. It must have been the pandemic that woke everybody up, I guess, because that's exactly when I started pivoting too. And so it
Mhm.
was this testimony of like, wow, like what should I be doing? Because you're talking about this and you're talking about that. And then it was like shiny toy syndrome in a way, because you just were like, I just need to be a sponge and learn all the things. And then I need to like throw it all at my audience. And then it was like, well, wait, you get lost in your own sauce because you can't hone in and anchor in your individuality. And I think sometimes it takes a little bit of time to really understand your individuality and
Mhm.
your own voice, and like how like everyone does what you do, right? But how do you stand out? It's because your own essence. And I think it just takes some time to like really anchor that in by learning what you like and what you don't like. And sometimes it
Well,
is
it
getting
takes
slapped on the
time.
wrist a little bit. What were we saying?
Yeah, well, it's like a lot of people are so fearful of mistakes. Well, I
Yes.
think I think a lot of people are fearful of mistakes. Like once you start something, you're gonna learn. Like I was 17 playing music, and now I'm 55. It's like, yeah, you had to start somewhere. And what remember is a lot of musicians when I was first starting, they felt like they didn't deserve to be on the stage. They had
Mm,
this like imposter syndrome problem where like if I can't be like John Lennon or if I can't be like Hendrix, I can't be like Jimmy Page, I don't belong there. But
mm,
then like in the 70s, one of the things that kind of freed us was like the punk movement, where we started seeing
mm.
CBGBs and we started seeing like the Ramones and Sex Pistols and the Clash and oh, you don't have to have perfect pitch. Oh, you don't have to play that like Pete Townsend or Jimmy Page. You can be a little bit more authentic.
Yeah.
And it comes in periods where you get the Green Day, you get the Nirvana, where people say, "Yeah, being authentic, that is something about that where it don't have to be perfect, but it's got this energy and this rawness." And I think that kind of comes from, yeah, the people who are willing to like have the kind of they get out and they jump on stage, even if they were scared,
Like
they go and they
polarizing.
have their voice. And you're gonna make
Yes.
mistakes and you yeah, and you grow
Yeah.
or people either hate it or they love it, but somebody's gonna love it.
And I think at the end of the day too, talking about that, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to get to that place where you're like afraid to make a mistake and also be afraid to not sound like everybody else. And I know that like I can speak for that in the coaching industry that a lot of the people that have so much influence are the ones that are the most polarizing and really standing up for their beliefs. And I think the same concept can go with music. I think it actually has to be because it's like you have to stretch the edge. You have to really allow yourself to like do something different in order to be recognized. And I think nowadays more than ever, no matter what industry you're in, authenticity is number one. It's not how can you sound like Taylor Swift. It's not like how can you be the same coach doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's like who are you and how do you bring your own flair and essence? What maybe it is the same thing, but what's your like what processes are different for you? Right. And I think that's how I started to differentiate myself between with other coaches because I have my own way of my own methodologies of how to get to the same result, but in a different way that works for me that I think might be faster or that might just feel better in my body. Right. So I think the same concept there is aligned in any industry is like you
Yeah.
have to be willing to go to those edges and really find your voice and speak on that.
Well, I think that's where podcast and if you get into webinars versus what's been going on lately, the trend is there used to be like an infomercial type of thing where you had these kind of canned videos that were very scripted. And I'm kind of, I've always been a live podcaster because I like the kind of radio live feel of talking to somebody for like an hour. And maybe the first 15 minutes is this, but half hour into it, you start to get the groove. You get into that flow
Yeah.
state with the guest. And what I find is like when, a lot of business people are going into podcasting. Why? Because we're going away from the infomercial and into something where they can have this back and forth with their clients, where they can have
Yeah.
like real time discussion with their target audience. And I think it goes back to that authenticity.
Hmm.
People are looking for something that doesn't seem like, oh, that's just an actor reading off of something. They want to know that that person's like a real person
And
and
that
they
they're
actually have
different. Like, why
a
should I
unique
listen
idea
to
and
your podcast versus the other person on the same topic?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's
I
just that
totally,
people
yeah.
wanna feel that human factor. The human factor is
Mhm.
is 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 that we're very creative, and, just because I'm not brand X doesn't mean you don't wanna check out the next brand. You know,
Yeah,
and I think at least in the podcast industry, it's very dynamic, and there's a lot of voices, and there's a lot of room for it, and we have the advantage of having a long form. In a world
yeah,
where people say, "Well, you gotta do it in 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 90 seconds." We can go for half hour, an hour. Some people go 2
yeah.
hours, and you're like, "How is that happening in a world where people are not supposed to have an attention span?"
Mm, yeah, that is definitely a point to make too, and I think that, I do think that it is not a special person, but I think the intention of listening to a podcast is the intention of, like, I'm here to, like, listen for a longer period of time. Right? Versus, social media, TikTok, Instagram, like, yeah, you're right. The attention span is so short. So it's like you have to get that hook in there and you have to like say certain things to like get the person to come back. And I think that's like where and also I've never fully aligned with people who like create content, like batch content, like for a full month or 2 months, because I'm like, well, I'm different every day. So I can do my content for like up to a week, like of a week's time. But after that, I'm like, I don't know if I want to talk about those different things. So I think it's kind of like going against the grain and like the norms, right, with business and marketing, and just again coming back to authenticity is
Mhm.
like really finding what works for you and sticking to that. And I also think that puts you at a advantage towards the competition, because you're going against everything else, right? You're not just following, you're being a leader. And I think that's also something to note as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole idea yeah. Well, the original idea, what I was told when I got into podcasting is like, you gotta have a very narrow focus. You gotta say that like I initially started, I only interviewed musicians.
Mm,
And then I branched into poets. Then I branched into authors, then film directors. And they said, well, it's about artists. Then I moved into like mentors, life coaches, shamans, and then business owners. And then people say, what are you doing? I said, well, there's a common thread with all human beings. Like a business owner is a creative, and,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
an actor is a creative, somebody who's a shaman, they're creative. Like all human beings have that creative spark and creativity, whether you're a musician or an author or a coach, you have to have some kind of idea that makes your program unique, and that is the
Yeah.
art of it. And I try to have that thread of being an artist is being a human being. Every human being, no
Mm,
matter what they think, has that capability. They don't have to be John Lennon. You don't have to be, you know, Paul McCartney. You don't have to be, that. Everybody is creative at something. And so if you can pull that thread together, you can talk to a wider audience. And then that
yeah.
kind of it's working.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I think it's something to say there too, because I think I was talking about this with a friend the other day. It's just like, yeah, we're just creative beings, and we need the flow state to create. And we all have our own way of coming together in that common denominator of creating. So I think that's really fascinating to kind of piece all those people together, and then really putting it at that space of like, yeah, we're all creative. We all think differently. And I think that's what makes us so cool and unique, is that you can have the same people in the same industry, but they're going to have different ways of getting to the same result. And I think that's really fascinating. I think, again, coming back to
Yeah, it just
authenticity.
well, you can
Keep
bring
going.
to your audience, you can bring to your audience different perspectives, and we talk to people from around the world,
Mm,
not just within the US. And it being bringing Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, different points of view. So it's not all one kind of cookie cutter thing. And the thing is, because human beings aren't that way. So yeah, and so if you put on a bunch of different people who are in the mentoring phase, some people were talking about energy, light healing, and so other people were talking about more coming from a philosophical point of view, or from a medical point of view, or psychiatry. And it's like the thing is, it's all kind of a one thing. It's like universal. Like there's a little bit of truth in everything, and
hmm
learning from different people every day opens your mind. It's like the Socratic method. Like
hmm
you started to see like, oh, I should be more holistic. I should start putting the multiple legs together, because not just one leg to anything. And that's what the common thread ends up being, is like so many people want to put walls when they should be like building bridges. There's
mm.
a lot of interconnectedness that to me needs to happen, and that's kind of my purpose.
I love that. No, that's so true. I love what you said specifically. Instead of putting walls, putting bridges, because they're all interconnected, and I think we all have a space to share our voice and to share our beliefs and how we view something, right? And I think that there's always, I think you've referenced this a few times in the podcast, of just like we're all humans having a human experience. And so I think there's something to be said for that, because there's always a perspective to see and opening your mind to. And I think that's like really important, especially as like a creator, because there's that common denominator that we're looking for innovation, and we're looking to lead, and we're looking to also be led at the same time. And so I think we need to be consistently open minded with ourselves and with other people so that we can really bridge the gap versus putting the walls and be like, this is right, this is wrong. It's like, no, actually, like we're taught, even like religion and spirituality. It's like, to me, that's a bridge versus a wall, right? I think it needs to be more of a bridge than a wall, because I think we're essentially talking the same thing,
Mhm.
just a different context. I think you can kind of utilize that as a space to acknowledge that it is just context, but it's the same thing, just in a different way and shared in a different way.
Yeah, because I mean, I grew up with Western religion, but then I lived in Japan and I learned like Eastern philosophy. I got into like Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, which is a Japanese kind of version of Buddhism. Created by this Nichiren Daishonin, was a Japanese Buddhist, had a different
Mm,
perspective, but it's still the law of cause and effect, still, kind of law of attraction. Though, if you track, good, positive energy will attract positive energy, negative will attract negative, and
mm-hmm,
that kind of mindset, it was kind of an Eastern mindset versus these other mindsets. And having both growing up as a Christian, but then kind of converting into that Eastern philosophy, I still have that Christian basis because that's what I grew up as a kid. But as I grew, I just say, well, why can't I look at something else? Why can't I open myself up to other ideas? Not that I'm going to
mm,
throw everything out, but you kind of like you see the common threads in all the religions. You see it. It's like so. How can I say was one way or the other? There's a
yeah,
lot of gray, but a lot of people feel comfort in creating walls because it's
yes,
comfortable for them, and there
yeah.
is some comfort in that, but usually you end up hitting the wall, and then things start to not make sense
Well,
because
and
it's
then it
very narrow.
hinders you. Yes,
so
exactly.
so
It
yeah,
hinders you versus allows you to continue growing. And I think that's something to really emphasize here is like, whether you're a business owner, whether, you have a certain belief system with your religion or spirituality, I think it's like it's just, even relationships, like there's so many, I think, areas of life where you can really apply what you just said, of just the space of like, it hinders you and it keeps you narrow minded. And if we're trying, like, it's called human evolution. Shouldn't we be evolving our way of thinking, our evolving our way of
yeah,
being and doing? And and I think it's just so fascinating to continue having these sort of conversations, because we can view things from a different perspective, but at the end of the day we're being biased. So how do we stop projecting our own feelings and start to see it for like an open mindedness? I think there's just so much of an advantage to see things with an open mind, because I think you get to be your own discernment, you get to start to make your own decisions and your belief systems, versus saying, well, this is right, this is wrong, this is acceptable, this is not, so I have to play in these walls. How do we break the boundaries there and really create a bridge and say, no, I took all this in and now I know what I believe? And I think a lot of people are challenged with that, because they, again, like you said, keep it in that containment of like, this is just it for me, can't go past there. Now if we as entrepreneurs, creators,
yeah,
innovators of the world, we wouldn't be where we're at as far as like the advancements we have in technology and medical, in the coaching industry and the music industry, if we didn't allow ourselves to break those barriers and say, I'm going to rewrite that. Actually, I'm going to find out for myself what this means for me. And then the movement starts. So I think there's just so much to be said in that regard.
well, yeah, with corporate, I mean, I was a corporate guy working for companies directly for many years in my software. But then what I found is like what worked better for me being an artist, because I like to put a lot of time
Mm,
into my side gig, was being a consultant. So I kind of got out of the corporate box, and I'm kind of more of like a freelancer consulting, doing design, and it totally freed me from the corporate structure of that yearly review and trying to make it to these different position levels. Like, oh, I'm gonna be a level one, level two, level five, level six, like VP, whatever. And I'm like, I'm not playing that game anymore because
Mhm.
now I just get paid for what I know how to do. And
Mhm.
I get, and I can do projects. And if I want to go tour, I can tour. Then I can go back to it, and I have a lot of freedom. And I can work from home, and I don't have to be a road warrior. So I decided, why don't I make it more comfortable for me, but I still have the safety of that main job, but then I have the openness to be able to do my side gigs. So I
Yeah.
was able to kind of find a way to do it all. And some people say, "Well, it's
Mhm.
all or nothing. I'm gonna be a starving artist. I'm just gonna drop."
Yeah.
And I like, well, I couldn't do that 'cause I couldn't thread that needle. But I kinda went, well, like, well, I'm not gonna be a corporate guy working for the company. I'll be a consultant. And then that worked
Yeah.
for me. And it was like this kind of
Getting and it's
creative
like
way of kind of threading the needle.
working smarter. Working smarter, not harder. And I think at the end of the day, it's like, again, looking at your issue, your problem, your challenge in a different perspective, and I think like when I first started my business, like I had a couple side jobs and I was like at first like, oh my gosh, like shouldn't I be full-time by now? And it was like, well, no, why don't I thread the needle? Why don't I make sure that my basic needs are met and also build my business? Because that will, I think, automatically put you in an abundant state of mind versus scarcity. And we know how scarcity plays out, right? Especially when we're serving other people. And
Yeah.
so I've tried to find that when I first started my business, I was like, okay, I need to find that happy medium where that's taken care of, where I can show up really abundant and strong and like empowered versus being like, oh my gosh, I need this sale to like pay my rent. Right. And so it's like, yeah, it's just finding a space where it feels alive for you. And I don't care what anybody says. I think you could totally build your dreams and also still do what you're doing until you get to a place where you can start to take more of a risk if that's what you want to do. But I think at the end of the day, what you're sharing is ultimately figuring out what works for you and being okay with how that looks versus, again, this is right, this is wrong. No, you need to do this you need to be the starving artist. You need to put do X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? It's really finding something that works for you and your rule book,
Yeah.
I think.
I've talked to some people and they're like desperation. People don't really get turned on by desperation. Like if you go and put yourself in that starving artist thing, and then you kind of radiate desperation because
Totally.
then you're kind of like you really need that gig to survive
Hmm.
rather than thrive. Where if you're comfortable and you're kind of not desperate, have that desperation, and people think, well, I got to have that fighting spirit. I got to be that guy, living out of my suitcase, going from gig to gig, kind of burning yourself out. It's like, yeah, maybe you could do that back 20 years ago, but now you don't necessarily have to be in that state to flourish. You could flourish without having to put yourself, on the street. And some
Yeah.
people
I
just
think
have a
there's
mindset like, well, I got to be Jack Kerouac on the road. I got to do. And it's like, yeah,
I think
maybe
it's
for
like
you, you
what
have
people
to do
are
that.
craving. Yeah, and I think what people are craving, because I can say that same thing, I can apply it to the same thing as the coaching industry. Like I just need to like quit my job and just start from zero. And like there is that sense of like operating in that pressure of like needing to make it work. And we've heard a lot of stories, no matter what industry, of like people doing that and really getting to where they want to be. But however, I do think nowadays, when a lot of us humans live in fight or flight all the time, there is something to be said to putting yourself in like homeostasis, right? And it's like I think there's needs to be a healthy balance of risk and safety when you're going after your
Yeah.
dreams, right? Where it's like you need to make sure that, in my opinion, my experience, like having your basic needs covered financially while you're going after your dreams. Because I know how I show up, like you said, as desperation and as scarcity versus abundant and thriving, right? And so I think that and then it's like that edge of like, okay, well, when do I know I'm ready to like flap my wings and fly? Right? Because like there needs to be this like risk tolerance of
Yeah.
like of the unknown, of the uncertainty, because that's always going to happen no matter what dream you're building, no matter what type of entrepreneur you're going to be, right? You need to have a healthy form of risk. And also I think there's something to be said of like it's okay to feel like emotionally safe while you're doing these things and building on them.
Yeah, I mean, there's always this point where you can kind of, you get into this state where suddenly your enterprise can go from, micro level to like a bigger scale. You can scale it up. But you like then you feel comfortable about how you're scaling it up, right? You're not just doing all or nothing scale it up. You're doing a scale up that makes sense because you can afford that new building, or you can afford
Yeah.
that new marketing plan, or your new distribution network, or you make it so that you can not that it has to be gradual. You can make big jumps, but you've kind of gone on a journey, and you're not scared of failing, and
Right.
you try things, but then you're not totally going to be out the door if something fails. so so
Yeah.
that because a lot of things happen. Like you think about a musician, like I write 100 songs, probably two of them make it, maybe one of them makes it, right,
Mm,
anywhere. And so there's a high rate of stuff not actually working. But then the way you look at it, is that a failure? Those 99 or 98 that didn't work, or am I using
mm,
those to get to the next thing? And then you find
yeah.
repurpose it, and you repurpose it. You had the experience, it taught you something different. You looked at something different. So you either look at it as half full or half empty. If you
Yeah.
start thinking very positive, those things aren't really failures. They bring you to another place. And that some people have a hard time with that because they say, well, every one of them should have made it. Well, that's not how it
Mm.
works.
No, and I think
It's like
like
you're gonna break some eggs.
yeah. And it's like when we go back to the original conversation of this podcast, purpose based fulfillment, when you know your purpose, you might fail, but you keep going. And so it's like, I was thinking in my head, like all these relations to your story of like, yeah, I mean, my coaching business in the beginning failed. I would show up to a workshop with one person signed up. Oh, it failed. But truthfully, no, it's your stepping stone. And I think we need to get on board with success looks like this. Right? Like you're going to have highs,
Yeah,
you're going to have lows. It
yeah.
doesn't mean that you're off path. It's actually putting you on track and on path to where you're actually supposed to be going. So all of those 100 songs, only two of them make it. You wouldn't have got to the two that made it and that made a significant impact if you didn't make the rest of the 92.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like it's that whole purpose. It's like finding my purpose is like part of it is showing up. Like a lot of people, it's like all or nothing. I run into people like unless they break it, they totally stop. Like those people I was talking about when I was 17, most of them their guitar's sitting in their garage or their basement. They never pick it up again.
Mm,
Like
mm-hmm,
yeah, all my stuff I've been playing my stuff since I was 17. I never stopped. It's a
mm,
different mindset. So some people don't continue because they're looking for like this instant gratification. But a lot of times,
yeah,
the things that are very soul satisfying don't always translate to immediate success in any
delayed
kind of world.
gratification.
Yeah, it's not a worldly success that you measure on a scale. It's a kind of inner success that like you feel good about what you did.
And even
That's
if it doesn't
the
get the
win,
recognition, you're like,
right?
I have to
Whether
do
anybody
this.
else
Yeah, exactly. It's like even if this doesn't go where I want it
yeah.
to go, like I feel happy with what I'm putting out there and I know that it's just going to get me somewhere. That's those statements and that delayed gratification has pulled me through so many times in my journey. And it's like it wasn't until probably the last year that I finally felt like I found my voice as a coach and as a human navigating the emotional experience of running a business. And I'm like, wow, like it took me that long. It took me 3+ years to get there. So it's like if that wasn't the like catalyzer and really like the epitome of what delayed gratification is, I don't know what is, and I think we all can, share our own stories there. But I think that like needs to be anchored into that because we're so looking for like, I'm impatient, I want this now. And it's like, well, what's the delayed gratification? Like, what's the long-term vision? Can you be okay with sitting in the turmoil? Can you be okay with having a couple mistakes and failures? Can you keep going? Like, how bad do you want this? Is this actually your purpose? If it is,
Mhm.
then you have to keep going no matter what.
Well, I think a lot of people want to kind of get into the idea like trauma. I mean, being a songwriter, it's kind of a common thing where trauma and sadness and melancholy actually generate probably the deepest songs
Hmm.
where like you can write songs about being happy or whatever, but tends to work the most is when a songwriter actually accesses something that's painful.
Yeah.
And then they kinda have this, like, it's a therapeutic, cathartic type of thing. So, trauma-informed coaching, can you tell me about how you approach that?
Yeah, so a lot of my work is really learning how to work with people's trauma and being mindful of triggering them as well. But also my certifications in my work helps other people really feel their emotions because we can't numb it, we can't take medication for it. We have to, the only way to move through it is to feel it. Feeling is to heal. And so that's kind of like my whole brand is like allowing yourself to feel and giving you different tools and rituals and practices and sensations and experiences to allow yourself to feel into the trauma. um, and really doing it in a very safe way. And that's where trauma informed comes in, where it's like if we're working with people with trauma, working with people who are moving through heartbreaks or imposter syndrome or negative belief systems, we have to learn how to work with those people where they start to feel safe in their bodies. And so that's really the premise of my work, is just really helping people feel safe to feel their pain. And I think that's the most empowering thing that we could do as human beings, is being safe to feel it and knowing it's okay to feel discomfort.
So, do you integrate, like, your breath work and your NLP and your Reiki into this whole kind of holistic vision, or you do, like, kind of a I guess it's like a person at a time? You know,
Mm.
each individual comes to you, and you might kind of hear what they have to say, and do you make a choice of which approach?
Yeah, so a lot of what I do is really kind of different methodologies kind of infused into one. So I do my energy work and my breath work together. And that's really just working with the subconscious mind, which I'm absolutely obsessed with. And then NLP comes in when we're talking about the subconscious mind, the patterns or the programs. So learning how to work with a person's unconscious. And then with my other coaching methodologies, it's just more of coaching sessions that we do. So, like, really, how I kind of create the whole package, if you will, is that I work with clients and I do 3 sessions a month. So, the first 2 sessions are coaching, and then the last session is breathwork and Reiki, because I feel like it's kind of like when you're chiseling away at a problem, it's like you can kind of see the surface of it, and like my coaching sessions help me kind of get to the surface, but sometimes there's things that are just lodged in the unconscious in the body that need to be excavated, and sometimes we need to get in a deeper state. So breath work helps me get people into a deeper state to access those other messages that they need to hear, and then the coaching will kind of help unpack that as well. So that's kind of how I cycle through those different methodologies, is kind of using them in that format that I find works really well with people.
Well, different, tools, to solve people's issues, 'cause I think everything is, sometimes it's not one size fits all. Like, people come to you
Yeah.
where they are, and then you have to
Yeah.
kind of figure out how to weave things together, and it still goes back to the holistic kind of, concept of, like, sometimes there's a lot of things that you might have to put on the table, as as ways to, address people's, trauma.
Yeah.
You probably gotta come at it a couple of different ways or multiple ways at once, or different phases based on where somebody is. Never not everybody's
Absolutely.
in the same place, right? So you have to figure out what to do.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is you just have to be open. You have to be open. You have to be desiring to let go of your problems, of your trauma. I've met a lot of people that are like, "I'm ready for the work," and then you ask certain questions, and they're getting defensive, and you're like, "No, you're not," and that's okay. And there's different things that we can do to help people like loosen up their baggage, if you will. But I think at the end of the day, yeah, as long as you're open and desiring to let it go, you'll get results. You just have to be willing to go to the depths of yourself. And I think for a lot of people, even myself, that's hard to face your stuff, like confront it and be like, oh, like I'm acting like that, or like, oh, I'm self-sabotaging my success, right? We get uncomfortable when we're judging our own selves, right? So it's so much easier to be like, nope, that's why. When it's like, no, actually, it's like I'm doing all of it. I am the narrator. I am the operator. So it's helping, and I think that's also where the trauma informed comes into, where it's like you can help people like loosen themselves up to get to a place where they can start to see their baggage outside of them versus like identifying with it.
Yeah, a lot of times, it's like one of the big problems we have as artists sometimes, like the crucible moments, like the sadness and the trauma that we use to create our work. Sometimes we run into a weird situation where your best work comes from your like worst moments in your life, right? And then when you're
Yeah.
finally happy, you do some work and then the fans don't like it. So then
Yeah,
you're
isn't
kind of
that
like, well, do I
interesting?
have to be in this bad state to create this work? And then it's like it's self-sabotage because they're like, well, I have to get
Mm,
really depressed and be in a really bad state. So do I destroy my relationship so I can create songs about my destroyed
mm,
relationship? It's like, do you go into a pattern where you're like, well, yeah, I can only do well when I'm not doing well. And I'm like, well, that's not good. That can't be good for
yeah,
you to
that's
do
not
that.
healthy. Yeah, I know it is. It's very interesting too because it's so true. Like I personally love a lot of like EDM artists. And so recently, not yeah, relatively recently, I started listening to songs, and instead of just like jamming out to them or being at the gym, I started to actually realize like all of these songs are about love. All of these songs are about my heart broken and I want you back. And I'm like, wow, isn't that so fascinating that it's like we're jamming out, having the time of our life, whatever that is doing. And I'm jamming out to someone's heartbreak. And it's very interesting too to kind of to think about it in that
Yeah,
regard. It's where we kind of it is. I think it's like this interesting space where I think it's, if I'm honest, I think it's because we've in a general sense like numbing ourselves until we feel something, and then when we feel something, we're like expressive, and it's like we need to learn how to be expressive in the moments of pleasure and of the moments of happiness and ecstasy versus just being like, oh, I need to be in a bad place to do this thing. Like I remember when I would remember in high school, I used to do a lot of poetry, and I was like, wow, I'm really good. But I was going through a heartbreak. And then it's like, when I'm not, I can't write. And it's like, I think it is, it's kind of like this program of like,
yeah,
we only can be emotional when we're moving through something heavy. It's like, how can we be emotional with ourselves and create that intimacy with ourselves in pleasure, in ecstasy, in a space of just abundance? We don't talk about that.
yeah. It's kind of like if you got, there's some periods of music like funk and disco where sometimes people could be happy, they could be elated, they could be really, it's about a party, and it was a
Mm,
different mindset. And so you go into those songs, and they're very, what actually makes people want to dance, wants people to be frenetic. If you get into like James Brown and Sly and the Family, you get all these like funk bands, Parliament and stuff. They did songs that were like, oh, this is really kind of like a party, and it's not
mm,
like the serious kind of melodrama of the other types of forms. And you can be just as creative in that with some of these bands, but people felt like, oh, you got to be, you kind of got to be in that melodrama of a
mm,
grunge kind of mindset. Like if you think about the grunge bands, like Nirvana and
yeah.
Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilot, they were all kind of like down on the upside. This idea they had to be kind of in that depressive state to write, like a Emily Dickinson kind of thing. Like why do you have to be in that mindset? And sometimes that's where that their head is, and that's where that energy is. But you don't always have to be in that place. You can find other things. You can be elated and happy and write stuff when you're in a happy mode, and you can get people to like it. Is this different? You have to be in that positive state. It's just a
Yeah.
different mindset again.
It really is. It's totally a different mindset. And I think again, it's like shifting the paradigm. It's shifting society. and like allowing ourselves to feel okay with where we are. It's like cool. Like for me, I was so used to being on a hamster wheel of success. And now that I'm like starting to see success, I'm like, oh, I have to like train my nervous system to like receive this versus being like, oh no, I'm in a bad place, or like, oh this,
Hmm.
oh that. And it's like, no, I feel really good. Thank you. And taking the compliments and just receiving them versus, trying to downplay it or whatever it is. I think just as human beings, we're just not taught that like it's okay to be happy or it's okay for things to be in a different way. Again, with regards to music too, it's like we're always looking for a space to create. And I think we've just autopiloted ourselves to create from a space of like scarcity and a space of missingness, right? It's interesting. You don't really hear a lot of songs about abundance
But
and
sometimes
about
it's,
happiness.
yeah. I mean, once in a while, you had Stevie Wonder in the 70s. They had this very
Yeah.
uplifting mindset during his like 70s kind of arc. He did like songs in the key of life, intervisions, and there was this very kind of spiritual, uplifting thing. And sometimes like Bob
Mm-hmm.
Marley with reggae had this kind of
Yeah.
spiritual. So there are forms that where people can do that, and there are artists that were able to do that. But a lot of times it's like the default is that, oh, I'm depressed, I'm sad, like heartbroken, I'm gonna go with that. Where sometimes the other thing is it's harder to get yourself in that state. That either it's like a spiritual state, like Bob Marley was like very much the spiritual idea of the Rasta
Mm-hmm.
is a very spiritual concept. It's like almost like religion to them, and
Yeah.
it put them on this different plane. And so then once you start doing that, it's like an elevation plane. And so once you're in that elevation status, that's how you get that vibe. You're like, wow, how does that happen? They're like, well, you have to get your head in that space.
Yeah. I totally resonate. And I think it's just this unlearning to relearn.
Yeah, that's a hard thing. I mean, that's why people go to people like yourself. They get to a life coach because usually they hit the wall, like an inner child, and they had all these things that were like beliefs that they thought were truths, and then they found out like, oh, I'm hitting
I
that
don't have
wall.
to
I
think
need
that way.
help.
I can reclaim
And like the thing
myself.
is, like a lot of
Yes.
times, yeah, I mean, it's just that a lot of times you're not taught that in school. Like how do you actually approach this? People are kind of so like
They
you
don't
have to
teach you life
find
skills
it
in
because
school
it's
for
not
some
really
reason.
something that you learn in high school.
No,
Yeah.
we don't learn
Yeah,
that
for
at
some
all.
reason,
It's
it's like they
just
have to leave that out, but you're supposed to be trained.
because they think your parents are going to teach it. And we know I'm a millennial. And it's like when we look at the baby boomers and even Gen Z, or not Gen Z, Gen X, they're still like the baby boomers are still very set in their ways, very, very, very set in their ways. And
Mhm.
The Gen X is getting a little bit more into a like I'm kind of set in my ways, but also I'm kind of open to seeing like how I've maybe like not done the best job as a parent. And it's like the millennials are like, oh my gosh, like we're in the healing era. Like we're here to like help clear out this generational trauma for the generations to come, and for us to have our children and really learn conscious parenting. And so I feel like a lot of schools are very in the space of like, no, that's for the parents. And unfortunately, like our parents had a lot of trauma from their generations. I mean, we can look at where they came from. Of course, they were in survival state, but then it's like they put that onto us. And then now we're the ones having to do all the healing work because we're like, no, that's not a way that we want to live anymore.
It was a lot of it was about repression and suppression and
Yeah.
kinda just suck it up. That's what I remember from
Oh, yeah.
my
My mom said the
grandparents and
same
my
thing.
parents,
You
like
had to survive.
yeah, and it's like maybe, like, my mom was a coal miner's daughter for real, and my dad,
Mm,
was in the military, coming from that time period of the post World War II, Vietnam era. And so, yeah, there's a different kind of point of survival mode, and
yeah.
not really and to survive, they had to push things down, and that was their method, but it's
Yep.
not really helpful to the next generations. It's like, that doesn't work.
No, and I think that's like really where we started to wake up, and I think, like I said, like I started to realize, like, I don't know, I think collectively, consciously, like we needed to have this awakening. And I think for a lot of us in our generation, we're seeing that like our parents did the best that they could, but they did not have the resources that we do now to work on these parts of ourselves. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's very interesting to have conversations with people that are into
Yeah.
this work, or see the perspective of where we've been as a human society to where we're going now.
Well, I think this talk has been really illuminating, and we actually hit the hour mark, but I want people to go and check out your JessicaMarieStep.com again. And to reiterate that that will be fully clickable when we're published. You'll be able to click through and go right to your website. And so maybe to tell people as we wind down the podcast, and what would they find there again?
Yeah, so my website is all with all of my offerings, upcoming offerings. You're able to follow me on social media on my website, and I also have different opportunities to work with me on there. And my retreats are mostly posted on there as well. So yeah, just you can kind of check a little bit more about me and what I have to offer and my energy.
Yeah, we encourage our audience to fully support the people who come on our show, our guests, by checking out the links that they offer. And like I said, they're fully clickable once we're published on whatever platform you like to watch or listen to podcast on. And we're on almost every platform that's out there. So again, tomorrow we'll be fully on those platforms. So encourage you to check that out. Thank you for being a guest on the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.